In 1982, a blackjack table at Caesar's Palace became the center of the most sophisticated card-counting operation in Las Vegas history. $9.3 million vanished from the casino floor in what appeared to be an impossible string of lucky breaks. No marked cards, no devices, no obvious cheating, just mathematics, precision, and a team that understood probability better than the house itself. The case went cold, the money disappeared, and the truth stayed buried for over 2 decades. But in 2008, a retired pit boss named Kyrie Jones walked into the Nevada Gaming Commission with a confession that would unravel one of the most methodical heists ever executed on the Strip. What started as routine surveillance footage review would expose a network of players who had turned card counting into an art form. The operation wasn't run by desperate gamblers or street hustlers. It was orchestrated by individuals with advanced mathematical backgrounds, disciplined execution, and the patience to work the system for months without detection. They didn't break the rules of blackjack. They simply played them better than anyone else ever had. On the evening of March 15, 1982, the high-limit blackjack section at Caesar's Palace was operating under standard protocols. The tables were monitored by overhead cameras, pit bosses walked the floor, and dealers followed established procedures for shuffling, dealing, and payouts. Security was tight but focused on traditional forms of cheating: card marking, dealer collusion, and device-based systems. What they weren't prepared for was a team that could beat the house using nothing more than their minds and perfect execution. The operation began quietly at Table 7. A well-dressed man in his 30s approached the dealer and placed a modest bet. His name was Marcus Washington, though the casino would not learn his identity until much later. Washington appeared relaxed, casual, engaging in light conversation with the dealer while placing bets that seemed random to outside observers. He won some hands, lost others, and maintained the kind of steady play that attracts no attention from security. But Washington wasn't playing alone. Across the room, 3 other individuals had taken positions at different blackjack tables. Denise Crawford sat at table 12, playing with the methodical precision of someone who understood every statistical probability in the game. At table 15, Jerome Mitchell maintained a conservative betting pattern that masked his true purpose. And at the bar, nursing a drink and appearing to watch the room casually, was Rashida Coleman, the team's coordinator and the architect of what would become known as the Caesar's Palace card counting operation. Before we continue deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The 4 individuals had spent months preparing for this night. They had studied Caesar's Palace extensively, learning dealer rotations, security patterns, and the specific rules variations used at each table. More importantly, they had mastered a card counting system so advanced that it made traditional counting methods look elementary. Their system wasn't just about tracking high and low cards. It incorporated deck penetration analysis, true count calculations, and betting spread optimization that allowed them to maintain a mathematical edge while appearing to play like typical recreational gamblers. Coleman had recruited each team member based on specific criteria. Mathematical aptitude was essential, but equally important were acting ability and emotional control. Card counting requires the ability to perform complex calculations while maintaining a casual demeanor under the scrutiny of trained security personnel. One moment of visible concentration, one betting pattern that appears too systematic, one reaction that seems calculated rather than spontaneous, and the entire operation would collapse. The team's methodology was built around what they called distributed counting. Rather than having one player count cards at a single table, they spread across multiple tables and used subtle signals to communicate count information throughout the room. When the count at table 7 became favorable, Washington would increase his bets. When conditions shifted to table 12, Crawford would take advantage. The system allowed them to maximize profitable situations while minimizing exposure to any single table's security attention. Their signaling system was invisible to casual observation. Coleman would adjust her position at the bar to indicate which table had the most favorable count. A hand gesture while reaching for her drink would communicate the true count number. The placement of her purse would signal whether conditions were improving or declining. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a woman enjoying drinks and occasionally glancing around the casino. In reality, she was conducting an orchestra of mathematical precision. The operation required perfect timing and flawless execution. Each team member had memorized not just the card counting system, but also the specific behavioral patterns that would allow them to blend into the casino environment. They dressed appropriately for their assigned roles. Washington wore the tailored suit of a successful businessman. Crawford appeared as a well-dressed woman out for an evening of entertainment. Mitchell presented himself as a conservative player, enjoying a night at the tables. Their clothing, mannerisms, and betting patterns were carefully crafted to avoid triggering any security protocols. The mathematical foundation of their system was based on advanced probability theory that went far beyond basic card counting. They had developed algorithms that accounted for multiple deck variations, dealer speed, and even the psychological patterns of other players at their tables. The team understood that successful card counting wasn't just about knowing when the deck was favorable. It was about maximizing advantage during favorable conditions while minimizing losses during unfavorable periods. Their preparation had included hundreds of hours of practice in simulated casino environments. They had rented equipment to recreate the exact table conditions they would encounter at Caesar's Palace. Lighting, noise levels, distractions, and dealer behavior patterns were all factored into their training. By the time they walked onto the casino floor, every aspect of their performance had been rehearsed to the point of muscle memory. The team's bankroll management was equally sophisticated. They had calculated the exact amount of capital needed to weather inevitable losing streaks while maintaining the betting levels necessary to extract maximum profit during favorable conditions. Their total bankroll was distributed across multiple accounts and carried in various forms to avoid detection. Cash, cashier's checks, and credit arrangements had all been established in advance. What made their operation particularly dangerous from the casino's perspective was the length of time they could sustain their play. Traditional card counters often burned out quickly, either from detection or from insufficient bankroll to handle variance. This team had the financial resources and psychological discipline to operate for extended periods. They could absorb losses that would eliminate typical advantage players and continue playing until favorable conditions returned. The first night's results exceeded their projections. By the time the casino closed, the team had extracted over $40,000 from the blackjack tables. More importantly, they had done so without attracting any attention from security. Their betting patterns appeared random to surveillance. Their behavior seemed consistent with recreational players, and their wins fell within the range of normal variance. To the casino, it had been a slightly unlucky night, nothing more, but the team understood that one successful session was meaningless. Their true objective was to establish a sustainable operation that could extract maximum profit over time. The real test would be whether they could return repeatedly without detection, building their winnings while maintaining their cover. The $40,000 was just the beginning of what would become the most successful card-counting operation in casino history. As the team left Caesar's Palace that night, they followed predetermined protocols for departure. They left separately, at different times, using different exits. No acknowledgement passed between them in public areas. Coleman waited at the bar for an additional 30 minutes after the last team member departed, maintaining her cover as a casual patron. Their reunion would not occur for several days, allowing time to analyze their performance and plan their next session. The team's success at Caesar's Palace was built on a foundation that extended far beyond that first night. Over the following weeks, they established a routine that would allow them to systematically extract money from the casino without triggering any alarm systems. Their approach was methodical, patient, and designed to operate beneath the radar of even the most sophisticated surveillance technology available in 1982. Kyrie Jones had been watching from behind the scenes during those early sessions, though he wouldn't understand the full scope of what he was observing until years later. As a pit boss with over a decade of experience, Jones prided himself on recognizing patterns that others missed. He had developed an instinct for identifying card counters, advantage players, and other threats to the casino's bottom line. But this team was different. Their operation was so carefully constructed that it appeared invisible even to trained eyes. The team's second session occurred exactly 10 days after their initial visit. This timing wasn't coincidental. They had studied Caesar's Palace's internal reporting cycles and understood that surveillance reviews typically occurred weekly. By spacing their visits appropriately, they ensured that their activities wouldn't be grouped together in any single review period. Each session appeared as an isolated incident of slightly elevated player success, nothing that would trigger deeper investigation. During their second visit, the team refined their approach based on observations from their initial session. Coleman had noticed that security attention was heaviest during weekend evenings, so they shifted their operations to weekday afternoons when surveillance was more relaxed. Mitchell had identified that certain dealers were more susceptible to distraction, allowing for more aggressive betting during favorable counts. Crawford had mapped the optimal seating positions at each table that provided the best view of cards while minimizing exposure to overhead cameras. Their betting progression during this second session demonstrated the sophistication of their mathematical approach. Rather than using fixed betting amounts, they employed a dynamic system that adjusted bet sizes based on multiple variables. The true count was the primary factor, but they also considered deck penetration, table heat, and the behavior of other players. When conditions were optimal, they could increase their bets to levels that maximized their edge. When conditions were marginal, they maintained minimum bets that preserved their cover while waiting for better opportunities. The psychological aspect of their operation was equally impressive. Each team member had developed a distinct persona that they maintained throughout their visits. Washington played the role of a successful businessman who enjoyed gambling as recreation. His conversation topics, mannerisms, and betting patterns all supported this cover identity. Crawford presented herself as a woman celebrating a recent promotion, someone who could afford to lose money while hoping for a lucky streak. Mitchell appeared as a conservative retiree, someone who played blackjack as a social activity rather than serious gambling. These personas weren't just surface performances. The team had researched actual professions, created backstories, and even established supporting documentation for their cover identities. Washington carried business cards for a consulting firm that actually existed. Crawford wore jewelry and clothing consistent with her claimed profession in real estate. Mitchell had studied retirement investment strategies well enough to discuss them convincingly with dealers and other players. The team's ability to maintain these personas under pressure was tested during their third visit, when a floor supervisor began paying closer attention to their play. The supervisor, following standard protocol, approached Washington's table and engaged him in casual conversation while observing his betting patterns. Washington responded perfectly, maintaining his character while continuing to play optimal basic strategy. His responses were natural, his demeanor remained relaxed, and his betting continued to appear random despite following precise mathematical calculations. This interaction highlighted the team's understanding that successful card counting required more than mathematical skill. They needed to master the art of misdirection, making their true activities invisible while performing under constant observation. Every gesture, every word, every reaction had to support their cover story while they executed one of the most sophisticated gambling operations ever attempted. Their fourth session produced their largest single-night win to date, over $60,000 extracted across all 4 tables. The success came during a particularly favorable sequence where multiple decks became heavily weighted with high-value cards simultaneously. Coleman's coordination allowed the team to capitalize on this situation by directing maximum betting action to the most advantageous tables at precisely the right moments. But with increased winnings came increased risk. Jones, who had been monitoring the Blackjack section's performance as part of his regular duties, began noticing patterns that concerned him. The losses weren't catastrophic by casino standards, but they were consistent in a way that suggested something more than random variance. Individual sessions showed reasonable results, but the cumulative effect over several weeks painted a different picture. Jones began conducting his own informal investigation, reviewing surveillance footage and examining betting patterns more closely. What he discovered was subtle but unmistakable to someone with his experience. The timing of certain large bets correlated with deck compositions that favored players. The betting patterns, while appearing random on the surface, showed statistical relationships that suggested systematic play rather than intuitive gambling. The challenge for Jones was that he couldn't identify any obvious cheating methods. There were no marked cards, no dealer collusion, no electronic devices. The players appeared to be following all rules and regulations. Yet the mathematical evidence suggested that someone was gaining an unfair advantage through methods that weren't immediately apparent. His investigation led him to focus on the 4 players who seemed to appear during the casino's unluckiest sessions. Each individual appeared legitimate when observed in isolation. Their documentation was proper, their behavior was appropriate, and their play seemed consistent with recreational gambling. But when their activities were analyzed collectively, patterns emerged that couldn't be explained by coincidence. Jones realized he was observing something unprecedented in his career. This wasn't traditional cheating that could be stopped by changing dealers or adjusting procedures. This was a systematic exploitation of the game itself, conducted by individuals who understood probability theory better than most casino employees. They were beating the house at its own game using nothing more than superior knowledge and flawless execution. The scope of the operation became clearer as Jones expanded his analysis. The team wasn't just counting cards at Caesar's Palace. They were part of a larger network that had been operating at multiple casinos across Las Vegas. Each location was being systematically exploited using the same sophisticated methods, with different team members rotating through different properties to avoid detection. The revelation that this was a multi-casino operation changed everything for Jones. His investigation expanded beyond Caesar's Palace to include intelligence gathering from contacts at other major properties on the Strip. Through informal conversations with fellow pit bosses and surveillance personnel, he began mapping a network of coordinated advantage play that stretched across Las Vegas. The Mirage had experienced similar patterns of unexplained losses at their blackjack tables during the same time period. The Bellagio reported consistent but modest player advantages that couldn't be attributed to normal variance. Even smaller properties like the Orleans and Sam's Town had recorded unusual winning streaks by players whose descriptions matched individuals Jones had been tracking. What emerged was a picture of unprecedented coordination and discipline. The team wasn't just running a single operation at Caesar's Palace. They had developed a systematic approach to advantage play that could be deployed across multiple properties simultaneously. Different team members would work different casinos on the same nights, maximizing their collective edge while distributing risk across the entire Las Vegas market. Jones discovered that the team's sophistication extended to their intelligence gathering. They had infiltrated casino employee social circles, gathering information about security procedures, surveillance capabilities, and internal policies. Bartenders, cocktail servers, and even security guards had unknowingly provided details about shift changes, camera blind spots, and management protocols that the team incorporated into their operational planning. The psychological profile of the operation impressed Jones more than its mathematical precision. These individuals had demonstrated the ability to maintain their cover identities across months of play while executing complex calculations under pressure. The level of discipline required to avoid detection while systematically extracting money from multiple casinos suggested a level of professionalism rarely seen in advantage play operations. Coleman, as the team's coordinator, had established relationships with casino hosts at several properties. Her cover identity as a successful real estate investor allowed her to obtain comps, establish credit lines, and gain access to VIP areas that provided better intelligence gathering opportunities. She had cultivated these relationships carefully, never appearing too interested in operational details while subtly extracting information that proved valuable to the team's planning. Washington had developed a similar network of contacts among dealers and floor personnel. His persona as a gregarious businessman made him naturally approachable, and casino employees often shared information with him that they wouldn't reveal to obvious advantage players. He learned about dealer preferences, shuffle procedures, and even internal discussions about suspected card counters at competing properties. The team's operational security was military-grade in its thoroughness. They used encrypted communication methods that were sophisticated for 1982, employing coded language and dead-drop locations for sensitive information exchange. Their financial arrangements were equally complex, with winnings moved through multiple accounts and jurisdictions to avoid detection by both casinos and federal authorities. Jones learned that the team had established safe houses where they conducted training sessions and operational planning meetings. These locations were rotated regularly and selected for their anonymity and security features. The team practiced their card-counting systems, refined their signaling methods, and analyzed surveillance footage obtained through various sources to improve their techniques. Their preparation included detailed psychological profiling of casino personnel. They studied pit bosses, dealers, and surveillance operators to understand individual quirks, preferences, and blind spots. This intelligence allowed them to tailor their approach to specific individuals, maximizing their chances of avoiding detection while optimizing their advantage play opportunities. The team's bankroll management had evolved into a sophisticated financial operation that resembled a hedge fund more than a gambling enterprise. They had established partnerships with outside investors who provided capital in exchange for shares of profits. Risk management protocols ensured that no single session could jeopardize the entire operation, while profit distribution systems motivated continued excellence in execution. Their success had attracted attention from other advantage play teams who sought to learn their methods. Coleman had been approached by representatives from similar operations in Atlantic City and international casinos, leading to knowledge-sharing arrangements that expanded the team's capabilities and geographic reach. The Caesars Palace operation was just one component of a larger advantage play network that spanned multiple continents. Jones realized that traditional casino countermeasures were completely inadequate against this level of sophistication. Standard procedures for identifying card counters focused on obvious behavioral tells and betting patterns that this team had learned to avoid. Their operation existed in a gray area between legitimate skilled play and systematic exploitation that challenged fundamental assumptions about casino security. The legal implications were equally complex. Card counting wasn't illegal, but the team's methods raised questions about fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering that had never been tested in court. Their use of false identities, coordinated signaling, and systematic exploitation across multiple properties suggested criminal enterprise rather than simple advantage play. As Jones compiled evidence of the operation's scope, he faced a dilemma that would haunt him for decades. Exposing the team would eliminate a significant threat to casino profitability, but it would also reveal security vulnerabilities that could be exploited by other advantage players. The sophistication of their methods meant that simply stopping this particular team wouldn't address the underlying weaknesses they had exposed. The team's final major session at Caesar's Palace occurred in November 1982, 8 months after their initial visit. By this time, they had refined their operation to near perfection. Their coordination was seamless, their cover identities were unshakable, and their mathematical edge had been maximized through months of practical experience. That night, favorable conditions aligned across multiple tables simultaneously. The team capitalized with precision, directing maximum betting action to the most advantageous situations while maintaining their careful facade of recreational play. Coleman coordinated from her position at the bar, her subtle signals directing a symphony of mathematical exploitation that extracted over $90,000 in a single session. Washington's performance that night was particularly impressive. Seated at table 7, he navigated a complex sequence of favorable and unfavorable counts while maintaining casual conversation with both the dealer and other players. His betting appeared spontaneous and emotionally driven, but every decision was based on precise mathematical calculations that maximized his expected value. Crawford, working table 12, demonstrated the team's ability to adapt to changing conditions. When the count turned unfavorable at her table, she seamlessly reduced her betting while maintaining her cover story of celebrating recent professional success. Her ability to shift from aggressive advantage play to conservative cover play without missing a beat showcased the team's training and discipline. Mitchell's conservative approach at table 15 provided the perfect counterpoint to his teammates' more aggressive play. His steady, methodical betting created a baseline that made the others' variable betting patterns appear more natural. His role as the team's anchor required equal skill but different execution, demonstrating the operation's sophisticated division of labor. The session's success represented the culmination of months of preparation, intelligence gathering, and systematic execution. The team had achieved something unprecedented in advantage play history: sustained, large-scale profit extraction from major casinos without detection or legal consequence. Their methods had proven that traditional casino defenses were inadequate against sufficiently sophisticated and well-funded operations. But success bred complacency, and complacency created vulnerabilities. Jones had been building his case methodically, documenting patterns and gathering evidence that would eventually provide the foundation for understanding the full scope of the operation. The team's confidence in their methods had led them to take risks that would ultimately expose their activities to the one person patient enough to see through their carefully constructed facade. The mathematical precision of their final session would later be analyzed in detail by gaming regulators and security experts, revealing techniques and methodologies that revolutionized understanding of advantage play capabilities. But in November 1982, as the team departed Caesar's Palace with their largest single-night win, they believed their operation was invisible, and their methods were undetectable. Jones watched them leave that night with a mixture of professional admiration and growing concern. He had never encountered anything approaching this level of sophistication in advantage play, and he understood that traditional countermeasures would be ineffective against such methods. The team had fundamentally changed the landscape of casino security, whether they realized it or not. Their departure marked the end of active play at Caesar's Palace, but Jones knew the operation would continue at other properties. The team's network was too extensive, and their methods too profitable to abandon. they would simply shift their focus to other opportunities, while their Caesars Palace activities faded into the background of routine casino operations. What the team couldn't have anticipated was that Jones possessed the patience and analytical skills necessary to piece together their operation years after the fact. His investigation would continue long after their final session, driven by professional curiosity and a desire to understand how such sophisticated exploitation had been achieved without detection. The evidence Jones compiled during those months would remain locked in his memory for over 2 decades. Too sensitive and too complex to share with colleagues who might not understand its implications. But time has a way of weighing on conscience, and eventually, the truth demands acknowledgement, regardless of the consequences. The weight of what Jones had discovered began to consume him in ways he hadn't anticipated. By early 1983, the team had vanished from Caesars Palace entirely, but their methods continued to haunt his understanding of casino security. He found himself reviewing surveillance footage from other properties, identifying similar patterns that suggested the operation had simply moved to more fertile ground. The sophistication he had witnessed wasn't something that could be easily abandoned or replicated by amateurs. Jones began reaching out to contacts at competing casinos, carefully probing for information without revealing the full scope of what he suspected. A pit boss at the Flamingo mentioned unusual winning streaks by well-dressed professionals who seemed to appear during the casino's unluckiest periods. A surveillance operator at Bally's described betting patterns that defied normal recreational play but couldn't be classified as obvious advantage play. The pieces of a much larger puzzle were scattered across the Strip. What disturbed Jones most was the realization that the team's methods represented an evolution in advantage play that most casinos were unprepared to handle. Traditional countermeasures focused on identifying obvious card counters through behavioral tells, betting progression patterns, and mathematical inconsistencies. This operation had eliminated all those detection points through superior preparation and flawless execution. The team's psychological warfare was perhaps their greatest innovation. They had weaponized the casino's own assumptions about player behavior, using stereotypes and expectations to create perfect camouflage for their activities. A successful businessman celebrating a business deal, a real estate professional enjoying her earnings, a conservative retiree playing for entertainment. These personas were so carefully constructed that they became invisible to standard profiling methods. Jones understood that Coleman's role as coordinator represented a breakthrough in advantage play organization. Traditional card-counting teams relied on crude communication methods that were easily detected by experienced surveillance personnel. Hand signals, chip positioning, and verbal codes were primitive compared to the subtle choreography he had observed. Coleman had elevated team coordination to an art form that operated completely beneath the radar of conventional detection methods. The financial implications of the operation extended far beyond the money extracted from Caesars Palace. Jones estimated that a team with these capabilities could systematically exploit every major casino in Las Vegas over an extended period. Their methods were scalable, their discipline was proven, and their intelligence-gathering capabilities gave them advantages that traditional advantage players could never achieve. During the spring of 1983, Jones attempted to discuss his concerns with casino management, but found that his observations were dismissed as overthinking normal variance. The losses attributed to the team's activities weren't catastrophic enough to trigger serious investigation, and the absence of obvious cheating methods made it difficult to justify increased security measures. Management preferred to focus on more traditional threats that were easier to understand and counter. The dismissal of his concerns frustrated Jones, but also reinforced his understanding of how the team had operated with such impunity. Casino security systems were designed to catch obvious cheaters, not sophisticated mathematicians who played within the rules while exploiting statistical advantages. The team had identified a blind spot in casino defenses and exploited it with surgical precision. Jones began conducting his own informal intelligence gathering operation, tracking rumors and reports from across the Las Vegas gaming community. Dealers gossiped about unusually skilled players who seemed to know exactly when to increase their bets. Cocktail servers mentioned well-dressed professionals who appeared during shifts when the house seemed particularly unlucky. Security guards recalled individuals whose behavior seemed perfectly normal, but somehow felt calculated. The pattern that emerged suggested the team had expanded their operation significantly after their success at Caesar's Palace. Different members were appearing at different properties on coordinated schedules, maximizing their collective advantage while maintaining plausible deniability about their activities. The network Jones had suspected was proving to be even more extensive than he had initially imagined. By the summer of 1983, Jones had identified what he believed were at least 12 individuals connected to the expanded operation. Some appeared to be core team members like Coleman, Washington, Crawford, and Mitchell. Others seemed to be newer recruits who had been trained in the team's methods and deployed to additional properties. The operation had evolved from a 4-person team into a sophisticated network with multiple cells operating simultaneously. The recruitment methods impressed Jones as much as the operational techniques. The team had apparently targeted individuals with specific skill sets from mathematics, psychology, and even military backgrounds. They sought people who could master complex systems while maintaining emotional control under pressure. The screening process was rigorous enough to ensure that only the most capable candidates joined their ranks. In 2008, 26 years after that first night at Table 7, Kyrie Jones finally broke his silence. The weight of what he had witnessed, the sophistication of an operation that had redefined advantage play, and the knowledge that such methods could surface again compelled him to step forward. His testimony to the Nevada Gaming Commission revealed not just a heist, but a blueprint that had forever changed how casinos understood the mathematics of their own games. The $9.3 million was never recovered. The team members vanished into history, but their legacy lived on in every security protocol that followed. Sometimes the most perfect crimes aren't about breaking the rules. Sometimes they're about understanding them better than anyone else ever has.